Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we're diving straight into the invisible mechanics of the global AI economy. We're going to unpack a chain of events that might seem completely disconnected at first glance, but are actually dangerously intertwined. We're talking about how a financial crisis happening 6,000 miles away isn't just a random headline. It's actually a blaring warning siren that directly impacts your retirement, your savings, and literally the very foundation of the modern stock market. Let's get into it. Okay, let's kick things off with a massive number, 320,000. Picture this. In the summer of 2026, over 320,000 South Korean investors woke up to find their accounts completely liquidated, just wiped out in a matter of hours. Imagine the sheer panic. Wall Street absolutely felt it. This wasn't some slow, gradual decline. It was a sudden, violent snap. And you know what the craziest part is? The root cause of all this localized devastation didn't even start in Seoul. It started with the world's most profitable company doing something it literally hadn't done in 2 decades. That panic kicked off because Google's parent company, Alphabet, decided to burn an astonishing $5.9 billion in a single quarter, and they spent it exclusively on AI. Big tech's AI obsession has always been pitched to us as this limitless cash machine. But the reality we're seeing on these balance sheets looks a lot more like a value-destroying black hole. When a giant tech company sets fire to that much cash just to chase a trend, the shockwaves absolutely do not stop at the borders of Silicon Valley. When Seoul stops trading because of those shockwaves, believe me, New York is next in line. To put that global connection into perspective, think about how these markets used to act. For the last 5 years, the US NASDAQ 100 and the South Korean stock market, the KOSPI, practically ignored each other. Their historical correlation was just 0.16, which is basically background noise. But by mid-2026, that correlation exploded to around 0.50. Almost overnight, their movements became dangerously interlocked. The two markets literally started breathing together. Why? Purely because of artificial intelligence. So here's the crucial point. South Korea essentially acts as a real-time heart monitor for the health of the entire AI sector. Every single night, while Wall Street is asleep, South Korean powerhouses like Samsung and SK Hynix open up for trading. They're the ones building the physical hardware that keeps the US tech bubble inflated. So when American traders wake up and see major dips in Asia's hardware supply chain, it triggers a massive chain reaction. If the monitor flatlines in Korea, the US giants trying to build out all this AI infrastructure are immediately in serious jeopardy. Now, this is where it gets wild, because this exposes the circular illusion of AI wealth. Tech giants are basically manufacturing their own demand out of thin air. It's like this. NVIDIA makes the physical chips, right? Then they invest a massive sum, say $100 billion, into OpenAI. OpenAI turns right around and uses a huge chunk of that exact same cash to buy NVIDIA's chips. The cash literally goes out the front door and comes right back in the back. NVIDIA's revenue looks amazing, OpenAI looks incredibly well-funded, and valuations absolutely soar. And they pull this whole thing off without even needing actual paying everyday customers to make the balance sheet look flawless. And man, this closed loop looks fantastic on those balance sheets. It fuels immense FOMO, the fear of missing out. This anxiety is so overpowering that it pressures massive competitors like Microsoft and Google to burn their own cash just to keep up the pace. Investors look at these circular cash flows and they mistake them for genuine organic market confidence. They're just terrified that if they don't get their foot in the door right this second, someone else is going to walk away with the millions. And that intense FOMO leads to some staggering decisions. To avoid losing this high-stakes AI race to rivals like Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon, Alphabet made the choice to simply absorb the cost of building its own infrastructure. Get this, in just 3 months, they burned an unbelievable $44.9 billion. They actually had a record quarter of revenue, hitting nearly $120 billion, and instead of banking those profits, they just set them on fire in data centers. They made a massive gamble that sustained growth would somehow magically cover the bill down the line. But here's where the story takes a pretty dark turn. Despite all these monumental history-making investments, corporate adoption is kind of failing. In 2024, about 17% of companies abandoned their AI initiatives. But by 2025, that number skyrocketed to 42%. Organizations are scrapping nearly half of their AI proof-of-concept projects before they ever even ship. Budgets get approved, pilots are built, the boardrooms applaud the fancy demos, and then absolutely nothing makes it to production. Actually, scratch that. It's not even a news story. We've seen this exact pattern happen before. Look at the IBM Watson precedent.
IBM spent years and billions of dollars trying to revolutionize medicine with AI. And they got solid results in testing. But there was one massive roadblock. No company could actually figure out how to make money off of it. By 2022, before this current AI hype even really got started, IBM quietly sold the project off in pieces. Today's trillion-dollar valuations are resting on that exact same uncontrollable growth model. Investments leading to more investments, rather than actual profitable utility.
Plus, beyond the shaky financials, running these language models is incredibly resource-heavy. Google noted that as their AI queries got cheaper to run, people just used them exponentially more. This is a perfect textbook example of Jevons paradox. As technology becomes more efficient, we don't actually save resources, we just burn through way more of them. Google even had to admit in an environmental report that its emissions surged by a massive 50% compared to 2019, entirely because of the physical toll of running this technology. Okay, let's pivot for a second to the external geopolitical pressures that are threatening to shatter this fragile loop. It all centers around the literal technology required to make AI physically possible in the first place, DUV lithography. These are deep ultraviolet machines. They are insanely complex tools used to etch circuits onto semiconductors at a microscopic scale, measured in nanometers, and the entire global AI market relies entirely on these specific machines. For years, the safe assumption was that export controls kept China boxed out, easily a decade behind in this technology. But then, bam, a report surfaced that a state-owned Chinese company named Aishengna was successfully manufacturing its own DUV lithography machines domestically. This was an absolute breakthrough. It bypassed long-standing global export bans, shattered the monopoly tightly held by the Dutch company ASML, and practically overnight erased the estimated 7 to 10-year technological gap that the West was heavily counting on.
As soon as the broader market realized what this meant, that cheap Chinese domestic alternatives could suddenly chip away at this monopoly, it sent an immediate, violent shockwave straight through Asian hardware suppliers. In a single trading session, pillars of the tech world like Samsung, SK Hynix, Tokyo Electron, and TSMC saw their stock prices plummet by over 10%. The whole financial foundation built by American AI giants relies on this hardware monopoly, and that foundation just cracked.
And while all this is happening externally, there is literally an internal corporate civil war erupting right inside South Korea. Chinese firms are importing decades of institutional knowledge by offering incredibly lucrative signing bonuses to Korean engineers. But it's also a domestic fight. Samsung is watching its top chip engineers walk right out the front door to join rival SK Hynix, lured away by eye-watering bonuses of up to $500,000. The very companies supposed to defend Korea's, and by extension America's, tech edge are helplessly bleeding top talent. You might be wondering, how does this compare to past tech bursts? Well, it's pretty different. During the dot-com crash in the early 2000s, companies went bankrupt, sure, but they left behind millions of miles of cheap fiber optic cable that literally fueled the next 2 decades of the internet. The AI bubble? It doesn't leave a gift like that. It leaves a devastating environmental footprint and massive data centers full of chips that physically degrade and lose their economic value in just 1 to 3 years. If this bet fails, you aren't left with infrastructure, you're just left with toxic scrap. Which brings us right to the elephant in the room, the massive systemic risk sitting in the stock market right now. Today, the top 20 companies account for more than half of the S&P 500's total value. Just really think about that concentration for a second. And roughly 10 of those massive companies are tied directly to AI and semiconductors. The entire market is basically balancing on the tip of a very narrow, very expensive spear. What makes the 2026 crisis so terrifying is how these timelines collide. It perfectly combines the mispriced, hype-driven tech potential of the 2000 dot-com bust with the violent, high-speed leverage unwinding we saw during the August 2024 Japan yen carry trade, where markets just instantly dropped 12% in a day. It is absolutely the worst of both worlds. Unprecedented concentration meeting unprecedented speed. And when that high-speed leverage finally snapped back, who got hurt? Let's go back to those 320,000 liquidated accounts in South Korea we talked about at the start. 62% of those wiped out accounts belonged to young people under the age of 35. These were retail investors who borrowed money because the rising market felt less like a serious risk and more like a game that everyone was winning. The leverage snapped back on the exact people with the absolute least capacity to absorb the blow. Now, don't think for a second this is just a South Korean problem. Here in America, you are holding the bag.
A massive share of ordinary retirement savings, everyday 401k accounts, standard passive index funds, and public sector pensions backing teachers and municipal workers are heavily concentrated in these exact same cash-burning tech giants. Whether you actively pick the stocks or not, your future is funding their gamble.
What this explainer really boils down to is that passive investing, which, we were all taught was the safe, boring, responsible choice after the 2008 crash, has quietly mutated. The index itself has become a highly concentrated, massive corporate gamble. A market crash isn't just red numbers ticking down on a screen. It's a very real, very tangible transfer of risk across society.
This quote perfectly highlights the issue. The risk has fundamentally shifted. It has passed from the people who chose to take it to the people who didn't. The upside of all this wild AI spending gets captured by the executives holding the lucrative stock options. But if the billions burned in those data centers go wrong, the losses land squarely on the shoulders of everyday people who never had a seat in the boardroom and can least afford to take the hit.
So we're watching this incredibly fragile, closed-loop financial system get squeezed from every possible side. It's threatened by internal corporate wars, massive geopolitical shifts, and the fundamental physical limitations of the rapidly degrading hardware itself. Unlike past tech booms, the AI era doesn't promise some grand structural legacy to fall back on. If the music stops, it just ends with sky-high debt and a huge pile of useless, environmentally damaging tech. Financial bubbles, no matter how grounded they seem in building the future, always end eventually. The leverage always runs out of places to hide. So, as this global domino effect, starting with hardware in Asia and ending right in the passive index funds of your retirement account, finally comes to a head, you really have to ask yourself this final question. When the dust finally settles, who gets handed the bill they never agreed to pay?